Everything around you is dimmed now, screens low, engines humming softly in the background. This is the command deck after hours, when the war feels far away and time stretches out in long, quiet breaths. Tonight's sleep story walks through the military future in a calm, controlled way. Settle in. You're safe here. You're settled, breathing slow, everything stable. The story ahead moves like a slow patrol through empty space. Let's step into it. I still taste metal when I think about that march. Not blood. Metal. The tang of chewed copper, the aftertaste of rail rounds and cold air filtered through ceramic. It sits at the back of my tongue whenever the ward lights dim and the hum in the walls drops low enough for memory to slip in. That's how I know the story is starting again, whether I want it to or not. We called it an escort mission. That was the polite term. On the slate, it was marked as a retrieval and transfer of high-value biological intelligence asset, cross-theater priority. On the ground, it was 4 fire teams, 1 grav sled, a civilian in a 2 clean suit, and 1 captured alien mine core throbbing under a tarp in the open cold. The world was called Amaran 9, though none of us used the name. To us, it was simply the plate. A slab of ice big enough to warrant a line in the war reports, coded in our dead and theirs. The sky there was thin and ghostly, a washed-out gray-green where the aurora slid and snapped. The ice under our boots was older than our species and creaked like it resented the weight of all the things we were doing on it. I remember the air that morning, thin but still enough to carry the sound of our suit servos as we walked in column behind the sled. Each step made a small, hollow drumbeat that echoed through the pressure ridges. Under that was the constant low vibration from the thing on the sled, a bass tremor that wasn't quite sound, more like a thought pressing from beneath your hearing. The Choir-Locus lay under a patchwork of restraints and mesh, taller than any of us even curled in on itself. Bioluminescent lines pulsed under its chitin, colors shifting in slow, nauseating gradients. The techs had laced it with dampers and injected it with suppressants, but the readings on the sled pylons still climbed and dipped in uneasy rhythms. We weren't told how they had taken it. Some assault unit, off in another theater of this frozen war, had managed the impossible and dragged his command organism back from a hive nest without getting erased. That part wasn't our concern. Our job was to move it from the crater where the dropship had dumped it to a bunker hidden under the ice several clicks away, where the xenology people would pick it apart and try to turn its own son against its kind. I was 4th in line on the right flank, rail rifle on mag harness across my chest, boots crunching rhythmically into the ice. The exosuit compensated for most of the cold, but I could still feel it seeping through into the joints, stiffening the left knee where shrapnel scars never quite stopped complaining. Above us, thin sunlight cut across the jagged horizon, turning the alien cyst towers into black teeth. The civilian walked near the front, close to the sled. His suit was newer than ours, less scarred, with extra sensors blooming around the helmet like fungus. He moved awkwardly in the exoskeleton, all angles and hesitation. I didn't have to hear his voice to know the type. I'd seen enough like him in briefings. The kind that believed the war was a puzzle that could be solved with the right equation. Our commander walked slightly behind him, between him and us, a bulkier shape in matte plating, long rifle slung and helmet bare of any insignia save for unit marking. His pace never altered. Slow, measured, steady. He'd been on the plate longer than any of us. It showed in the way he placed his feet, in the way he scanned the ridges without dramatics. We advanced into the brightening gray, a centimeter at a time. The sled's grav pylons hummed at a pitch just high enough to irritate nerves. Behind my faceplate, my breath fogged, then whisked away by the scrubbers. The first hours were quiet. Too quiet, if I'm honest about what I expected. We'd all heard stories about what the enemy did when we touched their command organisms. How they swarmed, how they sang their artillery into your bones. I think part of me was braced for immediate chaos, for a clean, straightforward fight, something you could point a rifle at. Instead, we got distance. Wide, open plateaus of wind-scoured ice, corrugated with old stress fractures. The alien cyst towers watched us, half buried, their surfaces slick and organic, veined with faint light. Nothing moved around them. No skittering scouts, no burrowing saboteurs, just silence and the ever-present subsonic hum from the sled. My helmet HUD flickered every few minutes, a dip in signal clarity that made the icons smear. The tech briefing had said to expect interference. Choir-Locus radiated neuroacoustic fields. Even sedated, this one distorted comms. Neural dampers in our suits took the edge off, but not all of it. Every now and then a faint pressure would squeeze the backs of my eyes, like I'd stared at flares too long. We walked in that quiet pressure, and my thoughts turned inward. To the line of us, trudging behind the sled, to the civilian pointing occasionally at his readouts, to the commander's slight course corrections. We were a small chain on the surface of something enormous and indifferent. The first tremor came without warning. At first I thought it was my knee actuator seizing again. Then the ice under us shivered in a long, low ripple that made everyone's stance widen automatically. The sled's pylons flickered. The Choir-Locus twitched under its mesh, a wave of light rippling along the length of its chitin. Our boots slid a fraction. A low groan rolled up from somewhere deep below, old ice shifting under new demands. The adaptive traction in my soles grated, searching for purchase. Through the HUD, timestamps stuttered, then snapped back as the tremor passed. The grav sled squealed in protest as one corner dipped into a freshly opened crack. The lead pair lunged forward, suits straining to keep it level. For a heartbeat, the entire mass of the Choir-Locus rocked, and its internal glow surged from muted green to a harsh electric yellow. That's when the sound hit. It wasn't a scream, not exactly. More like a chord, played at a volume the human nervous system was never meant to interpret. It came up through the ice and through our boots, through the air and through our bones, a layered, dissonant wave. My vision smeared sideways. My stomach clenched hard enough to make me gasp. Inside the helmet, a thin trickle of warmth touched my upper lip. Nosebleed. My HUD flared crimson alerts about resonance levels. I braced on my rifle as if it was a third leg, head bowed, letting the suit's dampers catch up. Across the column, a trooper dropped to one knee. Another shook his head sharply, trying to clear it. The commander planted one gloved hand on the sled frame, steadying it. The civilian clung to a pylon, hands white-knuckled in his gauntlets. The resonance spike passed like a storm front. Color in the choir. Locus dimmed back down, its chitin rising and falling in slower breath-like motions. My heart hammered behind the chest plating. The metal taste in my mouth deepened. We regrouped, adjusted the sled's path to account for the new fissure, and moved on. I marked the time by my suit's internal clock. 8 minutes after the tremor, my HUD pinged contact. Ghost returns at first, faint heat signatures flitting at the edge of range. Then clearer shapes triangulated against ridgelines, Nithran scouts, lateral to our route. I shifted my grip on the rifle, feeling the familiar heft, the reassuring slide of the mag harness unlocking. My breathing slowed out of habit. The squad's formation shifted microscopically, lines tightening. We never heard them with our ears, not at first. Only through the subtle change in the hum around us. The Choir-Locus's internal rhythm altered, frequencies overlapping like tension in a voice. It was reacting to them, or they to it, I couldn't tell. The first of the scouts appeared at a ridge crest, silhouetted against the thin sky. Spindled limbs, multiple jointed arms, carapace ridged and irregular, like grown armor plating. It moved with the fluid, alien certainty I had learned to hate. Behind it, more crests disturbed the ridge. A soft tremor in the ice signaled burrowers below. We braced. The sled slowed, pylons whining. I could feel my own expectations rising, the old part of me that liked things simple. Enemy there. You here. Kill or be killed. The firefight was quick and ugly. Rail slugs sparked off carapace. Alien chitin cracked and shed fragments into the snow. The scouts moved in lateral arcs, never directly at us, always probing, testing. The burrowers tried to undermine the route ahead. A rolled concussion mine collapsed the tunnel mouths in sprays of ice and meat. Through it all, the Choir-Locus shivered and pulsed. The more stress we put on the sled, the more the internal resonance climbed. Every emitted slug, every impact, every vibration echoed through its massive frame. The hum turned into a rough-edged growl that crawled along my spine. By the time the last scout tumbled sideways, legs twitching, my HUD showed yellow warnings, resonance levels trending upward, containment margins shrinking. I swallowed, feeling the dried copper at the back of my throat. My hand shook faintly once the rifle was back on mag harness. The dampers in my suit thrummed at a higher setting, barely keeping the nausea at bay. We took casualties in that first contact. One trooper with a shattered leg actuator and a cracked visor seal. Another with half his shoulder plate eaten away by acidic spray, flesh beneath charred and blistered. Med systems patched them enough to move, but their silhouettes in my HUD stayed marked in amber. The civilian paced the side of the sled afterward, gesturing toward the readouts, his posture jittery and agitated. His sensor array blinked in nervous patterns. I could imagine the arguments, even without hearing them clearly through the calm static. We had to keep moving, couldn't risk losing the sample. The numbers would be manageable if we maintained the schedule. The commander's reply was quieter, steadier. Even filtered through distortion, his body language said enough. He stood with feet planted, head turned slightly toward the ridgelines and the gray distance beyond, as if listening to something else. His hand tapped once on the sled, a small, controlled motion, then fell still. We resumed the march. The route took us along a series of natural ice bridges that spanned black chasms. Somewhere far below, the ocean moved sluggishly, grinding ancient flows against one another. Each bridge was a few meters across, barely wide enough for the sled. The ice flexed under the weight, creaking in a way that set my teeth on edge. The Choir-Locus grew more restless with each crossing. Light pulsed under its shell in rhythmic bursts. Sometimes a protrusion along its flank would twitch, like a limb trying to move inside restraints. The sled readouts jittered in angry reds and oranges. I stopped looking at them after a while. I could feel how close it was getting without numbers. Walking behind that thing, I thought about what would happen if it let go. We'd been briefed in the vaguest possible terms: neuroacoustic cascade, systemic nervous collapse, area denial event, clean words for messy deaths. I pictured entire trenches of our people dropping, suits clattering, bodies spasming as their brains shut off like lights. All of that carried forward by us, if we failed to keep this thing contained. The war on the plate had been going on long enough that casualty numbers had become abstract. Digits in reports, bars in charts, curves trending the wrong way. I knew that. I also knew most of those digits wore the same uniform I did, in colors once bright and now worn down by the cold. Sometime past the midpoint, the weather turned. The sky darkened from flat gray to a roiling bruise. Fine shards of ice began to fall, carried on winds that buffeted our suits. Visibility dropped. The ridges blurred into vague, shifting walls. Comms degraded further into half-words and bursts of static. Our formation contracted, not out of fear, but simple necessity. You stayed close because you couldn't afford to lose sight of the thin line of your comrades in the whiteout. The Choir-Locus did not like the storm. Its hum modulated upward, an irritated whine layered into the bass tremor. The grav sled fought the crosswinds, pylons sparking against the ice. Every skid and jolt sent a fresh spike through the organism. My neural dampers screamed overtime. My head pounded in sync with the rhythm that wasn't mine. We halted once to ride out a particularly bad gust. Standing there, huddled near the sled, I looked at my map overlay. The path we were on did not match the path we'd been briefed. It took me a minute to realize it. Numbers and lines meant less to me than landmarks, and in the storm, there weren't many of those. But the angle of approach to certain ridges, the distance to the faintly glowing clusters of alien cyst towers in the distance, those were wrong. The projected waypoint for the xenology bunker lay off to our left. Our current heading was dragging slightly right, deeper into territory marked as heavily infested. I frowned behind the visor, chewing the inside of my cheek. I thought about glitches, sensor drift, software patches not applied. There were always technical explanations, and we were deep in interference from the Choir-Locus. Still, once noticed, the discrepancy would not leave my mind. Ahead, the commander stood still in the storm, as if the wind wasn't there. His helmet turned slowly, taking in what little could be seen. Somewhere behind him, the civilian fussed over his instruments, shoulders tight. I wondered, not for the first time, what it felt like to carry his rank. To look at that thing on the sled, at the storm, at his people, and at the directions coming from far above and far away, and to balance all of it inside without letting anything show. We moved again. The contacts increased as we pressed deeper. Not full engagements at first. Shadows flitting in the storm, heat signatures sliding just outside optimal range, occasional probing shots that glanced off ice or armor. The Nithran were there, watching, adapting. They moved more boldly where the Choir-Locus's hum swelled, like insects drawn to their own hive queen. We could not afford to stop. Resonance readings climbed with time as much as with impacts. The thing had a cycle of its own, independent of us. Every minute spent in indecision shortened the remaining window of relative safety. I don't know when exactly I understood what the commander was doing. I know when I admitted it to myself. That came later, after the basin. But there was a moment, somewhere between one ice bridge and the next, when I registered the pattern of our deviations. Each route correction pulled us away from the human bunker and toward a region of the map marked in red, a vast depression where alien biomass readings clustered thick as storm clouds. A staging basin, a hive heart on the plate. It was the kind of place we usually hit with orbital strikes, when the storms were thin enough to permit it. We hadn't had that luxury in weeks. The Nithran had used it to build pressure for a push against our line of bastions. We were walking a living bomb into the middle of it. The realization settled into my gut like a chunk of broken ice. For a few steps, my breathing stuttered. I looked again at the map, then at the commander's back. His stride never changed. He kept the same distance from the sled, the same cadence. Around us, the squad held their formation. If anyone else had noticed the change of course, they did not show it either. That is one of the truths of war. You think in small circles when you can. 1 foot, then the next. 1 breath, then the next. The storm thinned as we neared the basin. Visibility opened to a wider, hazy view. What it revealed was worse than the whiteout. The alien basin was a wound in the ice, kilometers across, its floor a mesh of grown structures. Towering spires of fused chitin and ice rose from the depths, connected by webbed ramps. Cyst fields pulsed with dull, diseased light. Shapes moved along the pathways, morphs in their dozens, then hundreds, marching in strange, coordinated patterns. Even from the rim, I could feel the layered vibration of their movement through my boots. The Choir-Locus reacted like a tuning fork brought into resonance. Its internal glow flared, returning colors we had not seen before, deep purples and vicious electric blues. The hum rose in intensity until it was no longer background but a presence in the skull, a pressure that made it hard to think around. My HUD blurred. Lines of code scrolled as the suit systems tried to compensate. The neural dampers hit their limit. A sharp bolt of pain lanced behind my eyes, accompanied by a momentary loss of time. When my awareness snapped back, we had advanced several more meters, sled grinding toward the basin's lip. The Nithron noticed us properly then. Movement shifted in the basin. Columns broke apart, some turning toward us in insect-precise wheeling motions. New forms emerged from the cyst fields, larger organisms with extended sensory fronds, their bodies ringed with oscillating membranes. The air itself seemed to thicken as the silent choir of the enemy rose to meet the song on our sled. We formed a perimeter around the sled at the rim, boots planted, rifles raised, suits shaking subtly under the resonance barrage. Every breath felt like inhaling broken glass. The commander stood at the front, looking down into the basin. I stared at his back, at the line of his shoulders, at the stillness there. Part of me wanted him to turn, to shout something simple that would make sense of this. Part of me wanted him to order a retreat, to call down some hidden reserve, to admit this was madness. Another part, smaller, harder, recognized that he had already made the only decision left to him some time ago on some bridge I had crossed without noticing. We didn't have the time or the means to move the Choir-Locus anywhere else. We couldn't shut it down. The cycle was too far gone. Taking it anywhere near our lines would mean letting this basin happen under human cities instead. The only direction left was forward. The first wave of alien morphs reached the lower slopes of the basin. They climbed with terrifying speed, claws biting into the ice. Rail fire cut some down, shattering carapaces, hurling bodies back into the masses below. They came on anyway, unaffected by the carnage around them, locked into the patterns dictated by the song. The Choir-Locus's resonance peaked, then peaked again, each spike higher than the last. My nose ran freely now, blood smearing the inside of the faceplate. My vision tunneled. Somewhere to my left, a trooper dropped, suit convulsing. Another staggered but kept firing, rounds slamming into the oncoming forms. Time compressed into a series of impressions. The hiss of superheated air as a rail slug tore past my shoulder, the crunch of alien limbs under my boots, the jarring impact as something heavy struck my chest plate and slid off. My arms moved in trained patterns, but my thoughts were disjointed, floating outside of them. Through all of it, the commander remained a fixed point in my field of view. He advanced a few steps closer to the sled, one hand reaching out to lay flat on the alien's shell. For a heartbeat, his silhouette was framed against the swirling light beneath the mesh, a dark human outline against an inhuman glow. Then the Choir-Locus sang. Everything else in my memory revolves around that moment. Every detail before it and after it is warped by it. The sound went beyond sound. It wasn't just heard, it was inhabited. Layers upon layers of tone far above and below human hearing, folded into a single, impossible chord. It took the shape of every fear I'd ever had, and every image I didn't know I carried. It mapped the inside of my skull and then pushed against it from all directions at once. The ice under us vibrated so violently that it became, briefly, indistinguishable from water. Structures in the basin shuddered, their chitin skins shimmering. Alien forms convulsed in unison, limbs flailing, membranes tearing. Their own nervous systems, tuned to this command, overloaded. I could feel my heart stutter, my muscles locked. Vision collapsed into white, then into black, patterned with jagged, impossible geometries. For a second, I knew with absolute clarity that I was dying and that it would not matter. That everything I had been and done would be washed away in this one indifferent wave of song. Then there was nothing. When sensation returned, it did so reluctantly. First came pain. Not sharp, local pain, but a full-body ache, as if my entire muscular system had been wrung out and discarded. Then weight, the awareness of my own mass pressed against ice. My lungs remembered their work and dragged in a ragged breath, hauling cold, chemically filtered air deep enough to hurt. I opened my eyes. The sky above was clearer than it had been in days. The storm had passed, leaving only a pale, fractured light. The aurora was a faint smear on the horizon. My HUD struggled to reboot, icons flickering, then stabilizing slowly. A low whine filled my ears. Whether internal or external, I couldn't tell. I lay on my back at the rim of what had once been the basin. It was gone. What remained was a crater of fused ice and blackened chitin. Its surface rippled like cooling glass. Anything that had stood within its span was obliterated or melted into abstract forms. No movement, no marching columns, no cis towers. Just a dead, silent bowl drinking in the weak light. The Choir-Locus was no longer a coherent body. Where the sled had been was a scorched depression with fractured pylons twisted in on themselves. Shards of alien shell lay scattered nearby, each one emitting a faint, dying phosphorescence. My suit reported internal bleeding in minor organs and widespread neural microtrauma. Nothing immediately terminal. It suggested rest. I almost laughed, but my throat refused. I rolled onto my side, biting back a groan. The field around me was a graveyard of both species. Charred alien forms lay twisted in frozen contortions. Human bodies in scorched suits were scattered in a rough ring around where the sled had been, some crumpled, some on their backs like me, helmets cracked or fully opaque with damage. I saw the civilian suit near a collapsed ridge, half buried under debris, sensors dark. A twisted arm extended from the rubble, fingers still curled around a broken tablet. There was no movement, no indicators. The commander lay closer to the crater's lip. He was on his side, one arm stretched toward the center, as if he had tried to reach a little further before the wave hit him. His suit was dark, HUD icons around him flashing a steady, unbroken red. No vitals, no movement. The line of his shoulders was finally relaxed. I didn't move toward him. There was nothing I could do. Instead, I lay there, watching him, feeling the slow seep of comprehension through the fog in my skull. Somewhere in my helmet, long-range comm stuttered back to a semblance of life. Fragmented messages filtered through, bits and pieces of a picture forming. Enemy offensive in our sector stalled. Massive disruption in alien command patterns. Human lines holding with fewer casualties than projected. The bunker we were originally meant to reach reporting minimal damage from what had been expected to be a catastrophic push. The numbers shifted in our favor, just a little. Enough that some analyst in a warm room would draw a slightly less steep downward curve. Enough that some other unit somewhere would not be asked to do what we had done. None of those voices on the comm mentioned us. The mission would go into the records as asset lost in field due to enemy concentration. Escort element presumed destroyed. Enemy command network disrupted by unknown internal failure. The neatness of it made me feel sicker than the resonance had. I lay there for an unknown stretch, eyes half-lidded, watching the commanders still form. At some point, evac beacons deployed automatically from our suits. A med transport eventually homed in on the signals. I remember the whine of its engines, the shadow passing over me, the clatter of stretcher frames. More metal smells, more antiseptic. They lifted me away from the basin. For a second, as I rose, I saw the pattern of our final positions around the crater. A ring of human forms around the point where the Choir-Locus had died, like worshippers or guards. In the center, the fused ice and burned chitin glinted faintly, as if remembering the light from its own last song. Years have passed since then. I sit now in a room with soft walls and a fixed ceiling, on a station far from the plate. The war has moved on to other worlds, other reports. The line graphs have been redrawn so many times that that particular spike in alien disruption is just another data point in a long, jagged series. Fresh officers come through on rotation. Some of them talk loudly about decisive action, about the need for bold strokes, about how hesitation kills. I watch them from my corner and taste metal as they talk. When I think about leadership, I don't picture their faces. I picture a man walking in front of a sled across old ice, pace steady, helmet turned slightly as if listening to something only he could hear. I picture the moment when he altered our course, not by words, not by orders shouted into the comms, but by the quiet, irrevocable act of stepping in a different direction and not looking back. He carried a weight far larger than the biomechanical thing pulsing on the sled, the lives behind our lines, the numbers no one would ever see, the knowledge that every step forward sealed his own fate further. I misjudged him once. I looked at his restraint and saw weakness. I looked at his adherence to orders and saw a lack of courage. Out there on the plate, I learned how wrong that was. The last clear memory I have of him is not his body at the crater's rim. It is his back in front of me earlier, walking into thickening storm, never changing pace, while the hum of the alien mind built around us like a second atmosphere. The ice vibrated under my boots. My vision blurred with the interference. My own heart stuttered in my chest. He walked on. That's what command really is in the end. Not the shouting, not the gestures, not the visible bravery. It is the decision to keep walking at the right angle toward the place where the damage will fall on you instead of on the thousands who will never know your name. Sometimes I wonder if the Choir-Locus understood that in the last seconds before it broke itself singing. If that alien mind recognized the small human figure standing nearest when it unleashed its final song. Then I catch myself drifting toward questions like that and shut them down. Philosophy has no place here. The war grinds on elsewhere, and the numbers keep moving. All I have to offer is this: a record of one march across an old plate of ice, and the sound of a song that broke a basin and drowned a million footsteps. When the lights dim and the hum drops low at night, I still hear it. And under that, if I listen carefully, the steady rhythm of boots on ice, keeping time all the way to the edge. The end. The last moments fade out, leaving only the calm stillness after a long mission. You're safe, warm, and unburdened. Close your eyes and drift.